Today I'll share a story so human it may break your heart before it mends it. In the lonely stretch of the Old West, where every mile holds danger and memories of old scars, a quiet man found a woman tied to a post beneath the unforgiving sun. And it all started with one decision, a choice so small yet strong enough to shift everything that followed. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The heat rolling over the far stretch of Red Mesa warped the horizon like molten glass when Rhett Axton caught the sound, a cry that hovered between the sharp gasp of a frightened horse and the strained breath of a human pushed beyond fear. He followed it towards the east fence line, and there she was, a young Apache woman bound against a fence post, wrists swollen and raw, head drooping beneath the brutal sun. A wounded bay mare trembled beside her, sides heaving. Rhett sliced the rope in a single, precise motion. She dropped to her knees, forcing her eyes open when his shadow fell across her. A tall man, broad through the shoulders, carved by heat and scars of labor. Another stranger. Another threat. Her lips parted into a brittle whisper, a voice scraped empty of hope. "Do whatever you want, cowboy." Rhett froze where he stood. He didn't reach for her, not harshly, not in domination. "No, I'm here to help," he said, low and steady. Then he lifted her carefully, as though the desert had already claimed more from her than a person should lose. Before this story carries on, don't forget to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or tapping subscribe helps these frontier tales reach more folks who enjoy riding through the Old West with us. Tell us where you're listening from. Your trail matters. Red Mesa stretched wide beneath the late sun, unyielding, red-soiled ground shimmering beneath the heat. Sage-burnt wind drifted through the ravines, dust clinging to porch rails, window sills, and every plank nailed into Axton homestead. Rhett's cabin stood alone near the sandstone ridge, boards faded silver by sun and silence. Life here didn't rush. It endured. Inside, the air smelled faintly of iron, wood smoke, and sagebrush burned each dawn to chase away insects. He laid the girl onto the narrow bed near the window, where thin amber stripes of fading sunlight crossed her face. She hovered close to unconsciousness, yet her features carried resolve. Sharp cheekbones bronzed by sun, lips cracked from thirst, a strand of dark hair stuck to her temple. Her eyes, half open, haunted, held a quiet fire. Not fear. Pride punished. Outside, the injured mare stamped restlessly, her leg wrapped with a strip of cloth Rhett had torn from an old work shirt. He moved with the calm efficiency of a man long accustomed to solitude, pouring water into a tin cup, wringing a cool cloth for her forehead, adjusting the window to let the wind through. He didn't talk, not because he lacked words, but because words never saved him from anything worth remembering. His shoulders carried long years of heat and hammer swings, his cotton shirt darkened by soot, his jaw shadowed from days without a razor. A pale scar crossed the inside of his left wrist, a memory of something done to him long ago, something worse than desert sun. Hollowgate settlers whispered their theories about him. Former soldier gone quiet, trouble with command, the man who disobeyed an order no sane man would follow. Rhett never confirmed a thing. The anvil, not conversation, was where he left those pieces of his history. As the girl stirred, breath uneven but strengthening, he watched her with a still caution, the way someone watches a wounded animal deciding whether to run or fight. She flinched when she lifted her arms. The rope burns stood dark against her skin, jaw clenched, refusing to expose pain to anyone. Far beyond the window lay Hollowgate settlement, a dusty street of judgmental faces and quicker suspicions toward anyone with darker skin or tribal blood. Word traveled fast there, and Rhett knew it. He also knew the men who had tied her: Veskard Thrain, Draven Kor, and Torvik Helene. Men too loud when drunk, and too cruel when idle. He had seen how they handled horses. He could imagine how they'd handle people. The girl's eyelids fluttered fully open now, shadowed by distrust. Rhett didn't step toward her. "You're safe here," he said, voice quiet. She didn't reply. Her eyes scanned the room, then returned to him, measuring, deciding, no longer convinced but no longer terrified. Wind hissed outside, dust tapping softly against the windowsill, as if the desert itself paused to witness two isolated lives crossing for the first time. Evening crept over Red Mesa, with a streak of violet, slipping between cabin boards as she stirred again. Rhett heard her before he saw her. Fabric shifting, a sharp breath, the faint scrape of her heel against floorboards. He stepped back from the forge, wiping soot and heat from his palms with a worn cloth as he paused in the doorway between the workshop and the narrow living space. Liorra pushed herself upright, fingers skimming the edge of the blanket as if ensuring the world around her was no longer a tormenting blur. Her eyes swept the room with quiet caution until they settled on Rhett Axton. For a moment, neither spoke. The stillness between them stretched tight, woven with wariness, unfamiliar ground, and the silent ache of two people who understood danger far earlier in life than anyone should. "Where am I?" she finally asked, her voice rasped thin but sharpened by instinct. "At Axton Homestead," he answered. A mile south of the ridge. Her gaze shifted toward the window, measuring the horizon, studying exits, mapping escape, reclaiming a sense of space that had been taken from her. When she shifted her weight, pain cut through her expression, fast, sharp, unavoidable. Rhett took a step toward her. She tensed instantly, her back straightening like a bow drawn tight. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, voice low. She didn't answer, but the tightness in her jaw released just a fraction. He placed a tin cup of water on the table, not crowding her, not blocking her path. The distance he kept was deliberate, respectful, almost reverent. "Drink," Rhett said. Her fingers curled around the cup, though her hesitation lingered. The suspicion wasn't toward the water. It was toward the unlikely gentleness in his tone. Kindness was something she no longer trusted. When she lifted the cup, she drank slowly, her eyes never leaving him. "You cut the ropes," she said at last. Not gratitude, more like an accusation tied to disbelief. "No one should be left like that," Rhett replied, voice steady. The words hung in the air like thin shards of sunlight, fragile, unguarded. Nothing changed in Liorra's expression, but her shoulders lowered just enough for breath to escape her in a tired exhale. She set the cup down softly. "You know the men who did it," she said. Not a question. He nodded once. "I've seen their kind before." Silence deepened. The cabin seemed smaller, the air heavier, as neither of them looked away. Rhett recognized something in her eyes, something shaped by years of being watched, hunted, judged without defense. And she, in turn, seemed to read the quiet weight behind his stillness, the scar on his wrist not just a mark, but a story buried. Her gaze narrowed on that scar. "Soldier once," he said. "Now I fix what I can." Her eyes held him for a long breath, weighing truth, weighing motive. Then she shifted her legs, forcing her body upright. Even trembling, she refused to reveal weakness. Rhett moved a hand toward her, ready to steady her. She recoiled. Not violently, but with precision, like someone who learned long ago that help often came with wounds. "I can stand," she whispered. "I didn't say you couldn't," he answered. Something flickered between them. Not warmth, not yet, but the faint spark of understanding. The kind that might one day resemble trust. Outside, wind slid along the mesa walls, kicking dust against weathered boards. Inside, two strangers stood close enough to touch, yet separated by years of scars. Neither of them as alone as they once believed. Morning rolled into Red Mesa Draw, with a pale gold wash rising along the sandstone ridge. Liorra woke to its warmth against her skin, and the smell of coffee drifting from outside. Rhett was already at work. Metal rang beneath his hammer, a slow, steady rhythm that belonged to men who endure more than they speak of. Patience forged through hardship. She sat up carefully, pain pulsing along her wrists, though the swelling had eased. Someone had layered sap over the burns. She recognized the mix of pine resin and sage, a gesture she did not expect. Men who cut ropes rarely healed what the ropes had done. Outside, the sun was low and soft. Rhett didn't turn when he heard her steps, but the tempo of his hammer slowed, not stopping, just acknowledging. She drifted toward the corral where the injured mare stood. The horse lowered her head, no longer frantic, only trembling from memory rather than fear. Liorra approached with instinctive confidence, the kind carried by someone raised among living things instead of fences. The mare lifted her muzzle into her palm, breathing steady into the shelter of her touch. "Easy, girl," Liorra whispered, brushing gently over the bruising that mapped the mare's flank, her fingers tracing where rope had once bitten skin. Rhett Axton finally lowered his hammer, letting the ringing fade into the quiet air. "You handle her just right," he said. "She remembers who hurt her," Liorra answered, voice soft yet edged with truth. "But she also remembers who didn't." Rhett met her gaze, really met it, and in that brief exchange, something deeper than thanks passed between them. It was acknowledgement. That simple, unspoken recognition settled like a thread binding wounds neither dared name. In the days that followed, their lives slid into rhythm. Not spoken, simply lived. Liorra drew water from the half-buried barrel, favoring her healing wrist but pushing through anyway. She stitched the tear in a worn saddlebag and ground herbs into a salve that carried a sharp green scent through the cabin. Her movements were steady and precise, the kind learned from necessity, not comfort. Rhett cooked when she couldn't stand for long, his food simple but made with a quiet earnestness. And each evening, while he patched the cracked water trough, she hummed that old tribal melody, one that drifted like memory through the yard until even the wind seemed to pause and listen. They seldom spoke, yet silence no longer held the edge of strangers. It softened. It settled. It began to fit. One afternoon, thunder stacked low across the far end of the mesa, heavy clouds dragging shadows across redstone. Rhett drove a nail into a fence post while Liorra tied bundles of dried sage. Wind snapped strands of her braid loose and swept them across her cheek. He watched her, unintended, but unable not to. Each movement she made carried purpose, though beneath it lived a quiet sorrow, rooted deep, unnamed, unspoken. "You don't have to work," he murmured. Without looking up, she replied, "I don't know how to sit still." Rhett let the truth of that settle. "Neither do I." She lifted her eyes then, just for a heartbeat. A faint smile flickered across her mouth, small and fleeting, like lightning behind thick clouds. And they kept working, side by side, wind rattling stray twine, air thickening with rain. Later that evening, the first drops scattered across the land, tapping dust like silver beads. Liorra stepped into the open, letting her face rise towards the darkening sky. Rain was rare here, a quiet miracle that smelled of lost things returning. Rhett leaned against the doorway, watching her silhouette framed in streaks of silver falling through the fading light. "You said you fix things," she whispered. He answered without moving. "I try." A long silence stretched. "Some things break and stay broken," she said. Rhett stepped off the porch, letting the rain coat his shoulders as he neared her. "And some things," he replied, "find their way back." Liorra exhaled, eyes closing for a fragile moment. When she opened them, light rain still tapped the roof, the storm already retreating. Their connection deepened in slow, ordinary ways after that. Rhett brewed coffee weaker, knowing bitterness made her cough. Liorra began placing a small bowl of herbs on his workshop bench each morning, something to soothe the tendons in his scarred wrist. She never asked how he earned the wound, but she did not need to. They learned in fragments. A glance held one breath longer, a touch brushed without retreat. Hands passing tools, neither stepping back afterward. One night, Rhett returned from the fence line to find Liorra asleep beside the fire, blanket slipped halfway from her shoulder. He draped it gently over her, slow and careful. Her eyes opened anyway, soft, unguarded, stripped of the usual defenses. She didn't flinch from how close he was. "You don't need to look after me," she whispered. "I know," he said, steady as dust settling. There was no vow offered. No words tangled with promise. Only two hearts quietly adjusting to a gravity that kept bringing them closer. Even the land shifted, subtle but undeniable. Winds moved softer over the mesa, brushing against them like approval. The peace at Axton Homestead was thin, delicate, precious. But peace rarely survived long out in Red Mesa. Not when men like Vesgard Thrain walked the earth carrying their pride like a loaded rifle. The morning it broke, even the air felt wrong. Too still, too held. Liorra sensed it before Rhett ever stepped outside. Liorra stopped mid-stride near the corral, eyes narrowing toward the ridge where 3 sharp trails of dust climbed into the air. Rhett Axton stepped out from the barn, dragging a sleeve across his brow. One look was enough. They were coming. Vesgard Thrain rode in front, swagger heavy in the tilt of his shoulders, face flushed with the kind of anger men carry when shame burns too close. Dravenkor followed, jaw twisted in a sloppy half-sneer, and Torvik Helene trailed behind, knuckles clamped white around his reins. They pulled up just outside the gate, boots grinding in the dust as they dismounted. "Well now," Vesgard drawled, loud enough for the wind to carry it. "Seems our little Apache stray got herself comfortable." His eyes slid toward Liorra with a smile that made Rhett's stomach tighten. "We didn't finish our conversation last time." Liorra didn't move. Every line of her body held firm. She didn't retreat. Rhett saw fear flicker in her eyes. Yes, but deeper than that lived dignity. Her fire was unbroken. Rhett stepped through the gate, calm as stone, planting himself between her and the 3 men. "You boys should turn back," Draven spat into the dirt. "She jumped us," he lied, "so we're just taking her back to town." "She tried to stop you from gutting a horse," Rhett replied, "and you tied her to a fence post for it." Torvik shifted uneasily, guilt showing like a bruise beneath his posture, but Vesgard elbowed him hard, stepping forward. "She's Apache," he slurred. "That's all the law we need." Rhett's jaw locked. "Not on my land." Vesgard laughed, an ugly snarl of sound. "You think you can stand between us and what's owed?" Rhett didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way he squared his shoulders, the stillness in his eyes, the weight of his silence, those spoke louder than threats. Draven's hand drifted to his holster. Torvik reached for rope. Liorra stood behind Rhett, breath uneven, but her spine held straight. He didn't look back, didn't have to. Her presence was a promise behind him. "Move aside," Veskard growled, liquor thick in his voice, certainty swaggering. "You don't want us teaching you the same lesson we taught her." Rhett took one step closer, close enough for breath and threat to blend. "Try," he whispered. For a heartbeat, the desert froze. Wind held its breath. Dust hung still. Even the sun felt sharper. Veskard shifted. Not much, but enough. He had expected a frightened girl and a man worn thin. Instead, he ran into a wall no man could shove aside. Draven's hand dropped from his holster. Torvik turned away. Veskard swallowed the retreat with a bitter laugh. "We'll be back," he spat. "Hollowgate settlers don't take kindly to your kind mixing with ours." Rhett didn't blink. "Then Hollowgate can choke on its own dust." That hit Veskard like a thrown stone. He swung up into his saddle, jerking the reins hard, and the three of them tore off in a swarm of red grit, threats trailing behind them like smoke. When the hoofbeats faded, Rhett let breath escape slowly. Liorra stepped toward him, voice barely stronger than wind. "They'll come again." "I know," Rhett answered, finally turning to her. Wind caught her hair, brushing strands across her cheek. Her eyes shone with something deeper than fear, something dawning, the realization that she was no longer alone. "You didn't have to stand in front of me," she murmured. "Yes," Rhett said softly. "I did." They stood there for a long stretch of silence, framed by the burning red expanse of open mesa. Liorra studied him, searching for the reason behind his loyalty. He didn't offer one. He didn't tell her he could not endure the thought of harm finding her again. He didn't confess that something inside him shifted when she whispered that lost surrender. "Do whatever you want." He understood then that the world had taught her to expect cruelty before mercy. He just met her eyes, steady, open. Wind brushed along the fence post, dust lifting like memory. Liorra reached out, fingertips brushing the small, pale scar on his wrist. Her touch was gentle, careful. First contact she offered freely. "Some wounds," she whispered. "You don't hide as well as you think." Rhett's breath tightened, not from pain, but from truth. "And some wounds," he answered, "look smaller from the outside." Her hand lingered one heartbeat longer before she let go. "You shouldn't have to protect me." "And you," Rhett replied, "shouldn't have to fear anyone." She shouldn't have to fear men like them. The storm inside both of them eased into something unexpectedly quiet, almost tender. The sun sank lower, stretching their shadows across the red earth until they touched. One long silhouette where before there had been two. And for the first time, Liorra allowed herself to believe that there might exist a place where she didn't have to brace for pain. A place where strength didn't mean danger, but shelter. A place that could, impossibly, feel like home. The days that followed unfolded in an uneasy calm, the kind that settles over land and hearts after trouble brushes close, but hasn't yet bitten. Liorra sensed it in restless winds along the ridge. Rhett Axton sensed it in the way the horses paced at night, ears angled toward Hollowgate, though no rider came through. Both knew Veskard Thrain wasn't finished. Men like him rarely let an insult lie buried. Late one afternoon, with shadows stretching long across the yard, hoofbeats approached, steady ones, not swaggering or reckless. Rhett stepped onto the porch just as Sheriff Eldrin Marrow reined in his horse. His face carried the strained look of a man forced into business he wished belonged to somebody else. "Axton," Marrow said, tipping his hat. "Got matters we need to speak on." Rhett didn't move an inch. His posture was quiet iron. "Say it." Marrow exhaled hard. "There's trouble stirring in town. Hollowgate settlers are riled up about your guest." His gaze cut toward the window where Liorra stood inside, watching without hiding. "Veskard and the others filed a complaint," Marrow continued. "Claim she attacked them. Town council wants me to bring her in." Rhett's jaw locked. "She's not leaving with you." The sheriff lifted both hands, palms open, voice low. "Rhett, I'm trying to keep this from getting worse. I just need her in town long enough for questioning. It'll calm people down." "No." The word hit the air like steel striking stone. Marrow's eyes tightened. "You're making this harder than it has to be." Rhett stepped off the porch, closing distance until the sheriff's horse shifted beneath him. She was tied to a post. She was beaten. If Hollowgate has a problem with her still breathing on my land, then Hollowgate's problem is with me. The sheriff swallowed, torn by duty and conscience. "I don't want blood spilled over this." "Then ride back." Silence fell so heavy that even the wind held still. Finally, Marrow sagged slightly, defeated by his own sense of right. "I'll say I didn't find her. That's as far as I can stretch it." "That's far enough," Rhett answered. Sheriff Eldrin Marrow cast one last look at the cabin window, then turned his horse and rode toward Hollowgate, dust rising behind him like a fading threat. When Rhett stepped inside, Liorra stood near the table, unreadable. "You stood against your own people," she murmured. "They're not my people." She studied him a long moment, eyes shadowed, measuring. Men don't risk themselves like that for someone they barely know. Rhett pulled out a chair and sat, elbows resting on his knees. "Maybe I already know enough." Liorra moved closer, stepping into the warm circle of lamplight. "Marrow will tell others," she said. "Word will spread. I know. They'll judge you." "They already did," Rhett replied, a faint smile shaping the corner of his mouth. "This doesn't change much." But she shook her head slowly. "It changes something." He lifted his gaze, steady and unwavering. "What does it change for you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the window, brushing the curtain aside as she looked into the empty stretch of land. "When I was tied to that post," she began, voice low, "I believed the next man who came near me would be like them. That's why I said what I said." Her eyes turned toward him. "Do whatever you want, cowboy. I had no reason to believe any man would choose mercy." Her confession struck deeper than any wound Rhett had carried. "You were wrong," he said. "I know," she whispered. She returned to the table and sat across from him, lamplight glancing over the bruises still faint around her wrists. Rhett reached forward, not to take her hand, but to place his palm open on the table between them. Not demand, not possession, just offering space where she could choose trust. Palm open. Not possession. An invitation offered without pressure. Liorra stared at his hand for a long moment, breath shaking at first, then settling. Slowly, she placed her palm over Rhett Axton's. The touch was feather light, but it carried the weight of everything they had endured before finding themselves at this table. "I don't understand why you're like this," she whispered. Rhett didn't look away. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be on the wrong end of a rope, for refusing something I couldn't live with." True shock crossed her face. Her gaze dropped to his wrist, where that pale scar curved like a memory unwilling to fade. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Orders I wouldn't follow," he replied. "They tried to make an example of me. All it taught me was who I would never become." Liorra's breath stilled, not in fear, but in recognition. 2 lives carved by cruelty. two souls who had learned that doubt and pain always arrived before mercy. "You fix things," she murmured, repeating his earlier claim. "I try," Rhett answered. Her expression softened, though her voice stayed quiet. "Maybe some things aren't meant to stay broken." Rhett let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The cabin felt warmer, the world quieter, as if Red Mesa itself had settled around them. Protective, no longer hostile. Outside, moonlight spilled over the sandstone ridge, washing the homestead in pale silver. Inside, two hands rested together on a scarred wooden table, and for the first time in years, neither of them carried the weight alone. Dawn crept softly across Red Mesa, tinting the ridge with pale rose and muted gold. The storm of previous days had passed, leaving the air washed clean. Dust smelled of rain. The earth breathed again. Rhett stepped outside first, boots sinking slightly into softened ground. Liorra followed, braid dark against the new sun, her steps sure despite fading bruises. They walked toward the eastern fence line, the same stretch where Rhett had once found her bound, sunburned, half-broken. Now the fence stood half-repaired, new planks in place, wires waiting to be tightened. Rhett carried a hammer and nails. Liorra carried nothing, and somehow it was enough. When they reached the exact post where she had been tied, she paused. Her fingers hovered just above the wood, not touching, only remembering. The fresh plank Rhett had installed stood unscarred, a quiet rebellion against what had happened there. "You rebuilt it," she breathed. "Figured it shouldn't look like what they tried to make it mean," he replied. Liorra stared at it, then at the land stretching beyond. "It feels different now." "It should." She watched him drive a nail into the fresh board. Each strike cracked through the stillness, echoing across the mesa, and with every blow, something inside her loosened. Old fear, old silence, old ghosts that had stayed with her since her time near Hollowgate settlers. For so long she believed danger lived inside every man's shadow, but now she saw a different kind of shadow. Broad, steady, standing beside her instead of against her. When Rhett finished, he rested the hammer against the fence and turned to face her. The sun behind him painted his figure in dusted gold. Liorra stepped closer until she saw iron flecks caught along his jaw. "This place," she said quietly, "it is not gentle." "No," Rhett answered, "and neither am I." He gave the smallest, truest smile. "Good. A gentle place wouldn't know what to do with either of us." She felt the truth land deep inside her. Red Mesa was harsh, but so was survival. Only the honest things endured out here, windstone and the stubborn heartbeat that refused to quit. Liorra rested her hand on his forearm, steady and deliberate. "I don't know what comes next." Rhett placed his hand over hers. "We'll figure it out. One day at a time." Wind swept across the open land, carrying sage and dust like a quiet blessing. Behind them, cabin windows caught the early light. Inside, a lantern still burned, the same one Rhett had lit the first night she slept under his roof. A flame that survived wind, darkness, and fear. Liorra looked toward it now. "That light. It doesn't scare easily." "And neither do you," Rhett replied. Their hands remained joined. Wind faded. Stillness settled. And under the open expanse of Red Mesa, where land was carved by sun, wind, and hard truths, two figures stood beside a newly rebuilt fence. Their shadows stretched long and touched, as if the land itself had decided they belonged exactly there. "Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for being here and letting this story live within your heart." If it moved you, I hope you'll walk beside us through more journeys of the Wild West, stories filled with truth, endurance, and grace. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay close. Together we'll keep riding across these wide-open lands of memory and hope. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our narratives bring inspiration from the past, recreated with fictional and dramatized interpretations for entertainment purposes only. AI tools serve as creative support, but the storytelling, editing, and emotional refinement are handled by our team to guarantee authenticity. We comply with content policies for AI use, avoiding impersonations, identity fabrication, or historically misleading images. All visual and audio content is legally sourced. Redistribution or modification requires prior written approval. Thank you for honoring creativity, collaboration, and storytelling done with heart.